if you're not familiar with this lady, I'm really excited to introduce her to you. I'm afraid I would mess up your first name, so I just keep going with Nat.
Nat's good.
All right, good.
I respond to Nat.
That's right, sweet. She is an expert in biohacking and what that means, peptides, and really how to maximize your life. And I want people to, or at least from a health perspective. Did I say that right? Is that how you feel about it?
Yeah, no, I think definitely the whole space of biohacking, health optimization, it's about, we've moved into this space of, for the longest time, since the beginning of time, humans have been obsessed with not dying. Right. And which is great, and we don't want to die, and we want to make it to be old, but then we're sitting there going, yeah, but I don't want to be old and feeble. I don't want to be sore. I don't want to get old and not remember my own name. So now we've moved into this space of health span over lifespan.
Right. Well, I want that for myself personally. So that's partially why I pay attention to the things you say and who you talk to. You do a podcast as well, if I'm not. Let's tell everybody what that is.
So I'm the host of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast. It's a bit of a mouthful, but, people seem to be able to figure out what it is just from the name.
Sure. Tell me what the first response you get when you say the word biohacking. Typically, if you're not in the community, we're at KetoCon. This community is super astute, I want to say, in biohacking and how you might use your diet or even different kind of systems for measuring your body weight or etc. to maximize that. What'd you call it? Not lifespan.
Health span.
Health span. Right. So what's typical for somebody's response when you say, well, I'm a biohacker?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it entirely depends on who I'm talking to.
Right.
So some people will recoil in horror, imagining that I've somehow been embedded with a bunch of electronics.
Yeah, you've got a computer chip now.
Yeah, is that a real eye?
Yeah.
But, a lot of people are curious, what is biohacking? Biohacking, it's definitely a term that's suffered a little bit over the last little while. People very often will have a negative association with it, but ultimately all it means is that what we're trying to do is take control of our own biology and outcome. And interestingly enough, it doesn't necessarily mean we've got to be taking weird supplements or wearing weird technology and doing crazy things. It can be as simple as sticking your head out the window in the morning and seeing natural light, or even better, getting yourself outside, putting your feet in the grass and grounding. And so, I think the reason why biohacking has evolved to where it is now, which is almost taking us back to nature, is that we've become so disconnected from nature. And you would know all about that in your business, right?
I think part of my growing up and even what we do today is digging it up from the ground, right? From the land, from the earth. All of those things make it really important to a real important impact on our food, our bodies, our health, all those things. Thanks for touching on biohacking. And look, everybody, she's fixing to go speak here at the conference. We don't have a lot of time, so I promise you we can't cover everything this lady knows in this amount of time. Follow that podcast. We'll put all these links in the show notes. We'll get you to her social media as well. The other thing I know you're passionate about right now is peptides. And I don't know a lot about that. I know meat. I feel like meat's a good source. Can you give us a quick deep dive into peptides?
Yeah, just plug your nose, close your eyes, and we'll get there in 2 seconds. So really, the first thing is, what is a peptide? So a peptide's a protein, but it's a very small protein. So protein molecules are made up of amino acids, and a protein could be hundreds, if not thousands, of amino acids, and it'll be folded into this crazy origami shape. A peptide, in the way that we're talking about it, is typically a protein that's 50 amino acids or fewer. And then there's a subset of peptides that I'm going to be speaking to today called bioregulator peptides. And those are the teeniest, tiniest little protein chains that are only 2 to 4 amino acids long. I'll tie it back to meat because you brought it up. The bioregulator peptides are naturally occurring in our bodies, but when we're supplementing them and getting them from a natural source, we're actually sourcing them from animal parts, and very often organ meats. Right? So they're naturally occurring in those foods, and we now reintroduce them. So it's a really, it's this interesting concept that when we think about a traditional diet where people would have eaten all the parts of the animal, how interesting to think that they were actually getting access to these peptides that we are now struggling to kind of figure out how to get back into our system, because especially for the longer chain peptides like the BPC, that people may have heard of things like BPC 157 or thymosin alpha 1. These are slightly longer chain. They're under 50 amino acids long, but they're very powerful signaling molecules in the body. We produce those peptides, but when we reintroduce them, we are able to get the body to amplify that effect that we're looking for.
That's right. You touched on that, how we used to eat. Like if you get dropped off in the wilderness without anything to eat, guess what you're going to eat? Organ meats, fatty, the fat.
If you can get it.
If you can get it, if you can fish for it, hunt for it. That's how you survive. That's how humans are here today. We survived on those kind of foods. So for me in particular, the logic seems that's the stuff we need to be eating today. And then I feel good when I eat that way. What got you into this space? I think for just a quick touch for the listeners who aren't familiar with you, and maybe they all are, how did you even get into the space of biohacking, peptides, and these kind of things? Like what spurred you off the couch, let's say, or off the running trail, wherever you were, to go get passionate about this?
Well, I started off, my education, my university education was human physiology because I'm just fascinated by it. I kind of took a bit of a sidebar turn and ended up in a corporate job for a really long time. But I've always been inherently interested in health, and I've always believed that the body has the inherent ability to heal itself if we can get out of the way. And at some point in about 10 years ago, I decided to go back to school. I was done with this corporate business, and I went back to school and became a holistic nutritionist.
Awesome.
And which was great, but it would, already by then I was following, guys like Rob Wolf, guys like Dave Asprey, Mark Sisson, and they were talking a little bit about this biohacking business.
Right.
And as I'm going through nutrition school, I'm like, okay, yeah, food's really cool, but there's all this other stuff. And I'm, my husband sometimes says I don't have a good attention span. I consider myself a lifelong learner. It's just about perspective.
Yeah,
right?
sure. I feel I'm the same way. I'll kind of get bored for no good reason particularly, and I just want to get into another thing. So I think it's beautiful that you did. I also love that story. I didn't know it prior to just now, but it illustrates to all those people out here who may be in a corporate job, who may be saying, I really have a passion for this other thing.
Yeah.
Go do it.
Yeah,
right?
No, absolutely. I mean, look, it's sometimes it's harder for it to be practical. I was fortunate that I'm married to a guy who was very supportive, and
Sure.
I had the framework around me to make it a comfortable experience. But I met people in school that were going back to school. They had to fight for it. They really had to work for it. But they're super passionate, and I think that when you start tapping into your passions and things that really light you up, it stops being work and it just starts being like, wow, how lucky am I that I get to do this every day?
100%. Okay, let's explore a couple of the things that I always like to ask in the podcast, because really ultimately we're all pulling on this string of where food comes from and how important that is. From your perspective, what is the most misunderstood thing, or most, I want to say, just touch on where food comes from in your mind. Is there a misunderstanding about it? Is there a thing that you wish everybody would understand? Let's just pick one of those things and give the audience a chance to hear your perspective.
I think that the thing that's really important to understand for all of us, and it's becoming more relevant now as time goes on, is that food from nature, whether it's coming out of the ground or it's an animal that we consume, is a lot more than fats, carbs, and proteins. And it's got micronutrients, it's got vitamins, it's got minerals. And I do believe that it has a whole lot of other components that we do not even understand. And there is nothing in this world that can replace real food. And I feel like we're at a very weird time of the world where there's people out there who believe that they can go into a lab, create something we can ingest, and call it food instead of natural food. And I think that's a really dangerous assumption. I just think that for people to understand that the closer to natural food you can stick, the less likely you are to go off track with your health. And because food is not just calories and nutrition for your body, it's information for your cells, right? And so it's all the things we know, but it's also all the things we don't know that really come to play when it comes to food.
It's so true. It makes me think we've all, we went through a certain time where, I don't know, just our culture starts saying, hey, don't eat meat, fat's bad for you. Now we're starting to wake up and realize, that we swung that pendulum that way. Now we're probably swinging it back this way. Are you scared we might swing it too far the other way? Is it possible to go the other way?
You mean veganism?
Well, vegan might be
meat?
one way, but okay, so once let's say vegans this swing that way, then we come back these carnivore diets, which I know there's people listening who are like, meat only, that's it, nothing else ever? How can I do that? Well, it might be the perfect spot. That might actually be the bottom of the pendulum. And then these labs things are the next way.
Lab-grown
Like,
meat.
I just think life is this pendulum that kind of swings back and forth. 20, 50 years from now, we're going to look back at this and say, wow, we just didn't know that. We figured that out now. We're always just trying to get better. Do you think, so in your mind, where are we catching the pendulum?
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that. My belief is that I think that the carnivore diet is a great intervention. I'm not 100% sold that it's the perfect diet for everybody all the time. I know that there are people who are super successful with carnivore, and I have no problem with that.
Sure.
There are people who go vegan for a period of time, and it really works for them. The challenge is that when we pick one extreme, any one extreme, we run the risk of becoming depleted in other ways. Yeah. And if we were to go back in time, as humans, we would eat whatever we could catch that wouldn't kill us first,
right,
that was going to give us what we needed to survive. And so we evolved that way. So, I just think that it's the pendulum. I hate the pendulum. Because the pendulum keeps taking us to one extreme or another, and we live in a world, unfortunately, where things have become so polarized that people automatically think, well, if this is right, that must be wrong.
Right.
And I mean,
it's a mixture all the time.
It's just not that simple.
I thought your statement about food being information for ourselves was beautiful. It's a great way to think about it. Mm-hmm. I want to tell my kids that because they want to make bad decisions about food, partially because they see me make bad decisions with food. They see their friends making bad decisions with food. And I can't really dictate to them their diet. I mean, because they're going to do it eventually for themselves. So now it's time to give them just information. Hey, food's nutrition, food's fuel, food is information for your cells. I love that so much. That's got to be a clip. We got to put that one on TikTok. Maybe the people will hear and understand. Hey, or at least think about it. I can't say you have to think just like Nat or me or Peterson's. It's going to be up to you to figure that out. We encourage you to look into it. I think that's what we're really doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, the food conversation it's so important, and I think when it comes to kids, all we can do is do the best that we can to model the right behavior, like make as healthy food at home as you can possibly manage, help them to develop that palate, right? Because understand that processed foods are engineered to be very, very, well, the word is hyper-palatable. They're engineered to make you want more and more and more, which drives overeating and poor decisions. But if we can educate our palate to enjoy like a vegetable or a fruit or a piece of meat or healthy fats, then we just, like that, I think for kids it becomes, even if they stray from it at some point, they will come back to it.
Right. I wanted to cry just the other day. We're just a busy family. I've got 2 kids playing sports and well, my wife did the smart thing. She popped some salmon in the fridge out of the freezer and it was thawed out. So when the ball games were over, we had the option to not go to the fast food restaurant and to go home and cook the fish. And when we're sitting down eating the fish, my oldest daughter looks at me and says, "Dad, I love this." First of all, she loved the time with the family at the table. Second of all, she loved the food. She's like, "I feel good. This makes me feel good about me to be home eating food we cooked for ourselves." So
That's
it's
awesome.
been my experience. And now we don't do that really well. It's not like, I'm not saying we're the model family. I'm saying that one time opened my eyes to something. Give it a try, folks.
Yeah, it's a possibility. Right? I mean, it took your wife a moment to make that decision. You think ahead. I mean, you buy great meat. You have it in your freezer. I mean, fish is super easy because it thaws a little bit faster. It cooks a little bit faster.
Right.
But it's something that we have to make that effort and make that decision. I mean, I talk to a lot of people who are like, "I don't have time to cook. I don't know how you do it." You don't have to be complicated. Like natural food doesn't need a whole lot of work.
I want to fall down on the floor and pitch a fit. Anybody says, "I don't have time for it." You don't prioritize it. I mean, that's the facts. If I don't do it, it's because I didn't prioritize it.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to make sure we R&D a new product, we prioritize that in our business and we get it done. It's just like, so don't give me that excuse. Don't give yourself that excuse, because I'll do the same thing, give myself that excuse. And you just get along a lot better when you kind of take that one off the table and say, what am I going to prioritize? You make those decisions. You're in charge. Real quick, you got to go. 2 or 3 minutes. What's been one of the most fun podcasts you've done lately on your own show? Like, who have you talked to that you were like, wow, I was so glad they came on the show, or they taught me something? You got an example?
Yeah, you know what? I learned something from literally every single guest that comes on to. I mean, you do a podcast.
Sure,
like,
that's right.
It's
the gravy
it's
of the
beauty.
podcast.
Yeah,
that's
it's
right.
the beauty of podcasting. Like, you get, because when we get a guest on the show, they're doing something they're passionate about. They're diving into something that's important to them. Very often it's personal. It's a life experience that's gotten them to where they became super curious about something. Like, I'm about to interview a woman who's actually an exhibitor here. And she was, I don't know if she was an accountant or something, and her husband got sick.
Yeah.
And 20 years later, her husband's still alive, and she's become like a PhD. She's so freaking smart, she decided, I'm going to solve this puzzle. And if I can't solve it, I'm going to contribute to that solution. And so those guests are super inspiring. I interviewed a woman not that long ago who's actually reversing ALS in her patients.
Wow.
That was like mind-blowing. And then a couple of the guests that really rocked my world actually were the people that I learned a lot about the bioregulator peptides and peptides from.
Sure.
And the bioregulator peptides are fascinating. They come from nature. They're incredibly powerful. And so having conversations with these people it's just, it kind of sets you back and go, whoa, I didn't even know that was around. So
I mean, if you're listening to this, you obviously listen to podcasts, or you might be watching us on YouTube. These long-form conversations with this isn't a huge one, but like what I find so valuable is I'll listen to a podcast, maybe one you did with somebody, then I'm like, ooh, I need to check that person out. Then I go look at, and then next thing I know, I'm 5 different episodes off into some other conversation and just learning the whole way, and it turns out to be fun. Now, a lot of people probably don't drive as much as me, so it might be a little more difficult, but if you're running, I had a buddy call me just the other day. He's like, I've never listened to a podcast. Now that's all I listen to. My wife's called me an old man because I listen to talk radio. But, it turns out to just be really valuable. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for coming on our show, sharing just a little bit with our audience about biohacking, peptides. I encourage everybody out there in Peterson's Nation, all you PNFers, go check Nat out. We'll put links to all of her social media, website, etc. in the show notes. So go down there, click on it, and pull that string.
Well, Neil, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Now, good luck on stage.
Thank you.
Go get ready.
Thank you.
I know you're going to do great.
Thank you so much.